Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the next installment of Creative Chats. And today is the first one of 2021. God, it's crazy. It feels like it hasn't really started a new year because we've started in a lockdown again, unfortunately. But hey, but today we have Harry BOWER on. So Harry, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I am the aforementioned Harry BOWER. I am 25. I was going to say 24 then. I wish I was still 24. I'm 25. I am an event manager living and working in London. I work for EMAP, which is a publishing organisation who run lots of different events, a couple of hundred events throughout the year across the group, and we run all sorts from small bespoke roundtables and webinars up to kind of medium-sized conferences, careers fairs, exhibitions, and our kind of bread and butter is award ceremonies. So we own lots of different brands, and then we run the events for those brands. I don't know how much you want to introduce myself, but I'll keep talking until you tell me to shut up. Okay, good. I grew up in Brixham in Torbay in Devon, and what a great time it was. I tell you, I wish I was back there during the lockdowns. Definitely, being back by the sea, but unfortunately, I'm in a high-rise London building. High-rise makes it sound sexy. It's not. So grew up in Brixham, and then studied performing arts and technical theatre, and got involved in a music festival, a music arts and culture festival down there when I was kind of growing up, and ended up running it with a team of local people, built it up into kind of 25,000 people, big festival with fireworks and live music and arts and crafts and kids day and dragon boat racing and you name it, we had it. And then I went to university. I went to the University of Surrey in Guildford, and studied international events management. Convenient. Graduated, moved to London, joined EMAP, first job, and I'm still there. So having a great time, having a ball. And then during the pandemic, it all went tits up.
Yeah, that's definitely the best sort of detailed description we've had so far of please introduce yourself. So that's very impressive.
I aim to please.
Absolutely. So that's really, really impressive. So of course, you've had a lot of experience with events and all across the place. I mean, you started in Brixham, the Southwest, the same place that I started in, and you've sort of moved around. You went to Surrey, you've now been to London, so you've been all over the country with this.
Yeah, we so the events that we run at EMAP are mainly UK based. So there are a couple of international events across the business, but I don't work on them. They're mainly domestic. So we do, before the pandemic, I would be all over the country regularly. So we did some events in Manchester, Liverpool, Nottingham, Leeds, Wales, Scotland, most cities in the UK we get to, which is great, and that was a lot of fun, traveling around doing that, and hopefully we'll get back to that in end of 2021, beginning of 2022. And then my other event experience, kind of through university, made lots of contacts in the kind of crowd safety, event safety world, and so I work with a number of mega events, they're classed as, so you would say kind of big sporting events, Ascot Racecourse, Royal Ascot, work on the London Marathon, Ride London, have worked on Boomtown Festival before, and a couple of other kind of smaller festivals, half marathons, the London Stadium, West Ham home games, work on those as well, and so had quite a lot of experience of a diverse range of events around the country. Really, a lot of fun.
Yeah, it sounds it. Absolutely. So so your work at EMAP, of course, recently has taken a bit of a different turn, as you described it. It's gone a little bit tits up, and as I think I talked to you before coming on this, one of the biggest questions we had was about the changes that your business has made to deal with this. Of course, as you said, as I remember you saying before, that EMAP are a company that rely on these events for their sort of, you know, income. And how is that on a much larger scale? What has had to change?
Everything. And it kind of, when I say it's gone tits up, actually EMAP as a company, we're owned by Metropolis Group, and actually as a company we've fared okay, pretty well, I would say. In fact, given the circumstances, I think the events industry as a whole has somewhat gone tits up. The problem really was that pre-pandemic, I think most people in events would agree with me, virtual and hybrid, as it's referred to, hybrid events, where it's kind of part physical, part virtual, was all it was almost a dirty word. You know, people didn't believe that virtual events could work, and so very little experience existed in mainstream event management. There are obviously niche organizations that do virtual events, and that's what they did anyway pre-pandemic. But a lot of people like myself, for example, never really took it seriously, never wanted to take it seriously, because physical is our bread and butter. We never envisaged a scenario in which everything would have to go online. And if we did envisage that, then we envisaged it being a scenario in which events don't matter, because if something that big is going to happen, then, events are right at the bottom of the list. I think because of that, there's been there was originally such a huge skills gap. And so it took the events industry as a whole a while to let the dust settle from the virus and the lockdown, mid first lockdown, and think, now what do we do? Because anyone with a brain could see that this wasn't going to end by Easter, or then by the summer, then by winter, then by Christmas. Everyone knew that this was minimum of a year, probably much longer than that. Thank goodness for the vaccines. But so I think how things have changed, everything's changed. I mean, I sit and remember, let's say a year ago today, January last year, we had Microsoft Teams installed on our work laptops, and I was the only one that ever used it, I think, for messaging people, because it had just appeared in January last year, and I was like, oh, this is interesting, let's see what this is. Nobody was using it for video calls. If you worked from home, you often just didn't join meetings. You didn't, you would send some notes in advance, or you maybe would send a summary email or something like that. You just wouldn't join the meeting. And now, it seems absurd that when we go back to the office in a year and a half, or, not a year and a half, but let's say a year and a half time, things are back to normal, it would seem absurd that you wouldn't join a meeting via Teams on a conference call, because why wouldn't you do that? And so what I'm trying to say is something as simple as working from home, or, joining a conference call, was a million miles from our daily thoughts in January last year. And so everything about your life has completely changed. And so my job particularly changed, overnight, from what it was to what it is now, which is part crisis manager, part virtual event manager, part physical event manager, because we've got a plan for the return of physical events at the end of the year, part admin person, part technician, part streaming technician, part video editor, because we edit all the video content, part graphic designer. We've all of a sudden we've gone from event manager to all of the above. And so everything's changed. The entire way that we work as a company has changed, and I guess we just got on with it.
Now, the skill gap between different people, because I think, I know for a fact as well that everyone before, if you said, oh, I'm going to do a live streamed gig or something like that before the lockdown, people would be like, Why would you? Why not just do it in person? That kind of thing, because that ultimately was where the money was. There's, that the virtual gig was kind of something that it was difficult to get people interested in. But now, of course, it's completely changed. I mean, I still know a lot of people who still feel that way, still want to touch anything virtual at all. But yeah, it's a completely different world. Do you think what are the things that you, maybe specific to you, but maybe on a broader scale as well? What are the things that you found that you think are going to stay about either the way you work, or because you mentioned Microsoft Teams? Do you think that's going to stay?
Oh God, I hope not. I think what I think is has come very clear on Microsoft Teams. Teams is very good at what it does, and Zoom is very good at what it does, but not when the entire world relies on them, right?
Yeah.
You know, when you're using Microsoft Teams to send a group message to a team or to chat with somebody one-on-one, amazing. When you're using it to try and have a conference call with 50 members of staff, and you want everyone to contribute, I mean, everything is so basic, and they roll out these updates that are kind of incremental upgrades, and that's great. But really, I think like systems design really need to kick up the arse. There are countless examples of that, not just video calling software, but loads of software that we've been forced to use to make events virtual, like streaming software and editing software and stuff, that just is not fit for purpose and never was fit for purpose, but nobody cared because the people that used it were using it to supplement the physical equivalent, right? So I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think for me personally, I think that all of the skills that I've gained through having to switch everything and become more technical, those skills won't go away, obviously. And so I think we'll build them into, I know for sure, EMAP and other, basically every other event organizer that has switched from fully physical to fully virtual. We won't do a switch from fully virtual to fully physical again. There's a halfway step, and the halfway step is half physical, half virtual, because we're going to be limited to numbers of people in the room. We're going to be limited to ways we can deliver things. And so you're going to need this kind of halfway house. So I think in the immediate term, our job is going to change again, because we're going to be having to deliver a physical event and a virtual equivalent, or companion, as we're calling it. And so you'll be using those new skills alongside your old skills. So that's great. I think in the longer term, how that then kind of translates into our future workload, I don't know. I know that, for example, delivering a virtual conference is A, cheap, and B, relatively comparatively easy. And so if you've suddenly come up with a new idea for a conference and you want to test it out before you pay a venue $5,000 and pay a big AV team, to build a stage and whatever, virtual will probably stick around in that sense. And the way we use things digitally, where we beam in speakers and we, sponsors and attendees participate from home, and we do Zoom calls for kind of roundtable discussion, I think that'll all stay on a smaller scale and on a more bespoke level, especially with international stuff. The ability to get an international speaker to speak at your event without the carbon emissions of flying, without the diary constraints of having to stay overnight in another country just to deliver a 1-hour lecture to a group of people you don't know. All of those different things, I think, will change the way our industry works. Me personally, I hope that it hasn't changed the way I personally work forever, because I thrive off of being around people and having people feed off of our ideas together, and that human contact, which I don't care what anybody says, you cannot replicate. If we were having this conversation in a coffee shop, I'd be enjoying it a lot more. Let me tell you that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's nothing to do with you or the conversation, or the idea of recording a podcast. It's because when you're with somebody, you can't replicate that experience. And so yeah, I really hope it doesn't change things for good. And it's why I'm a bit skeptical of people making such big life decisions in now,
Yeah.
Like you hear stories of friends of mine and other people in life who are making massive life decisions now about what they want in the future. So they're moving out of cities or into the countryside or out of the countryside, or whatever decision they're making. They're quitting jobs. They're moving countries. They are, making these massive step changes in life.
Mm.
Is now the right time to do that? Is what we're experiencing now permanent? Absolutely not.
No.
Things will go back to how they were. Cities will fill up again. The tube will become busier than ever. And, so from a London perspective, moving out of London really only works if you are, I admire people who have come to that decision and they've been thinking about it for a long time. But I don't know. I couldn't do it. I couldn't make a decision based on what we're experiencing now. I think things will go back to pretty much how they were.
Yeah. I completely know what you mean about the sort of social interactions. It's often, I find, it's less sort of the bigger things. I find it's often some of the smaller things that you end up missing the most about the sort of being in a very sort of like very buzzing, creative environment that you sort of have very small conversations. You see people, your friends, your colleagues on a regular basis. And it's that kind of atmosphere that ultimately I feel like I miss the most from, in my scenario, from being on campus at a university to being sat at home in front of my computer. And I think do you find that's the same with your workplace as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think being on site as well, there's a lot to be said for, we've delivered a lot of virtual events over the last 4 months, a lot,
Yeah.
Multiple a week. And when we were doing that in the physical world, you would have space and time to think when you're traveling to the venue, on the train, and you've got 4 hours of free time traveling up the country to chat with colleagues and build relationships and not talk about work or talk about work, but talk about creativity and how and ideas and come up with it. And so you have that, then you get to the venue and you set up, and then it's the evening time. You might go out for dinner with everyone. You have some drinks. You turn up in the morning, you deliver that event, sometimes on a hangover. And then, it's everything built around that experience. Whereas virtually, you're running a conference, you're working until probably 11 p.m. the night before because you've got loads of stuff that you forgot to do because digital involves twice the workload. And then you deliver the event, it ends. And then what? You might have a quick Teams call to say, well, wasn't that good? And then you probably, go into your bedroom, crack open a beer and put some football on. What pleasure is there in that? And there's no creativity. There's no creative discussion that can happen between you and your pals on the way back where you say, oh, this worked really well. This didn't work so well. Maybe we could try it this way next time. Maybe we do this next time. So I think, there's a lot to be said for that physical environment and that creative atmosphere. And I always think, most of my creativity comes out when I've got space and time to think about things, and I can reflect on what's gone on. And, and that's not to say that during the relentless pace of September to December last year, which, that was our busy period, really, we were working all hours of the day, some weekends it was really, really busy. That's not to say I wasn't being creative then. But that's forced creativity, right? Where you're forcing yourself to innovate because you need to survive. Whereas the creativity that I thrive off of is where you sit back and you say, okay, how, and you really look at how you can improve things and what new things you can do and new ideas you can take up. And that, for me, I'm at my best with that when there are other people involved. What about you? Do you, when you're creative, are you creative on your own or in groups of people?
Depends on what I'm doing, really, I guess. I mean, a lot of, I love being in groups of people and and then working, but also just kind of discussing it with people, because I find that there's always so much you can learn from the way other people do things. They are, from my own experience of sort of writing, recording music and doing photography and all that kind of stuff is that we all end up in the same place, but there are about a billion different ways that you could have gotten there. And, so it's
and actually we don't really end up in the same place, because some people end up in a better place than others because they work with people that help them get there, and why do teams exist? Could I run an event on my own? Yes. Would I? No, because other people have better ideas, more creativity, expertise in a certain field. That's why multi-million sales artists get together and write their songs with other writers in groups. In a studio, you don't just record one version of the song and then finish. You get creative and work out what you can do and how you can change it and so I think that's such a massively undervalued part of our creative process and the system, the work system. And I think when we did that switch to virtual or to working from home, in a business environment, at least for the first, 6 weeks, we really tried to keep that going, and we had frequent social calls and frequent, we had a water cooler meeting invitation for 30 minutes on a Monday where we just all joined this call. We grabbed a cup of tea, the equivalent of standing at the water cooler in the office, and chewing the fat about the weekend, because it's important to have that space to think and to be social and to interact with each other. And then obviously furlough came in, and then your workforce gets decimated, and so lockdown version 1 became monotonous very quickly, I think, for most of us. I worked throughout. I wasn't furloughed, so for me it was kind of you can still have those social interaction, that creative chat, but the pool of people you can have it with is like non-existent. There's like 2 or 3 people that you can chat with, and so it kind of takes away from that. But I think when we go back to the office, one of the things I'm really keen to do is make sure people value that creativity and that space to to chat with each other. I don't want to see everybody working from home, even though we can go back in the office. That would be the worst thing for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talk a lot. I mean, you work in sort of an office.
I talk a lot. Yes, I do.
I mean, but it's why we love you. It's why.
Yeah. Who's we? The audience have all switched off like 10 minutes ago.
The ones that have stayed, they love you. And okay. Yeah. Anyway,
I guess I'm in a fortunate position in that I work for a company that, firstly, a company that encourages that and encourages difference and celebrates creativity and innovation, but mainly that I work for a company that is its own client, right? So we own our brands and we decide what's best for those brands. So if we decide, hey, I've got this idea and I think this could really work for brand A, okay, just do it. If we can prove that it will be a good idea and that it will be financially successful and that we can market it and there's appetite for attendees, then great, go for it. Whereas if we were if I worked for, let's say, a more stringent organization that is limited by, let's say it's an agency, an events agency, you go out, you seek a client, the client tells you what they want and then you deliver it, right? So that's not a particularly creative job unless you get creative clients with creative jobs, right? Yeah. But there are tons of event agencies that do very boring standard conferences with no innovation, no difference, no opportunity for them to kind of move away from the norm. And so, I feel very lucky to be in a position where I can do those kind of things and get creative, and that's encouraged.
That's really good. Yeah. I mean, without giving too much information, I know from talking to my girlfriend who works in the marketing industry, that working with clients can be the difference between sort of having your own sort of owning your brand and you having a company's vision and then sort of having to rely on a client's vision can really alter the way that you're able to approach these sorts of things.
Totally. Yeah. And I think there's a place for that. Don't get me wrong. With our events, they're client led in the sense that we're our own client when we decide which events to hold. But ultimately, we are at the behest of people that will pay for it, right? So if we rely on sponsorship, and we rely on attendee revenue, and we rely on speakers giving up their time. And so to a more or less a degree, we are dependent on our ability to provide something that people will pay for. And so we can't go wild, and we still, have to be within that parameter. But yeah, it's certainly not, we're not held ransom by a client to deliver it, exactly this and exactly that, or I'm not paying you. We're not quite in that position, which is nice. And sometimes that can breed innovation and success, but oftentimes it can also breed complacency and a lack of creativity. So I guess you just have to be aware of that.
Yeah, that's fair. That's it's really, really good. A point that you said earlier was about sort of, people making decisions and stuff like that. And you, of course, came from Brixham, but then, of course, moved to London, which is two very, very different places. What drew you to London? I mean, apart from probably the job, of course, that you have. And of course, you said you didn't want to potentially move away. What drew you, and what keeps you in London?
That's a good question. Let's get the record straight. I love Brixham and I love Torbay as a place. So that's all the Devon trolls can move along. I absolutely go on.
We get a lot of predominantly most of the people that watch this, I would imagine, are from the southwest. So
yeah, God help me. No, I love the southwest. I absolutely love the south. I've got family in Cornwall, family in Devon. Love the whole of the southwest. Fantastic. Yeah. However, the level of opportunity, particularly in corporate events or events in general, for paid positions, plenty of events, plenty of voluntary events going on around the southwest, of course, and plenty of music tours to Exeter and Plymouth. Yeah, totally. But the bulk of the work is in bigger cities, and I think opportunity wise in Torbay, I started volunteering and working on Brixfest, the festival, when I was 15. I worked in theatre and events for must have been 5 years in Torbay, and in that time didn't really find anything that I thought would offer me a decent roadmap to success. And success is obviously relative, so in my eyes, what I wanted to achieve, which was to work for a big organization with good progression, good and frequent progression, and not necessarily, that's not necessarily promotion, but progression in terms of my professional development and opportunity. And I guess that was much more prevalent in London. And then the other reason is, I wasn't 100% I have to move to London. I could have ended up in Manchester, could have ended up in any other city really, or internationally. I think I've still got ambitions to live in the US, maybe. I haven't really thought about it much in the last couple of years, but initially that was one of the things on my list. So I think, and the other big driver I was about to say was going to Surrey University, and being that close to London, and therefore having access to all of the opportunity that came my way at university, but was always based in London. So anything that came in while I was at uni was always in London, and so that reinforced the belief really that I should be there. And then when I started job searching, I wasn't specifically looking for London, but the bulk of opportunity and the bulk of jobs that were available were London based. So listen, I think had I gone into a different industry or was interested in a different way of life, living by the sea and whatever, then I absolutely would have stayed in Torbay. But just for what I wanted, at the time, the opportunity wasn't there, and I had to move away to get where I wanted to get to. And I no doubt I'll be back, when I'm later in life, because it's home.
Yeah, that's fair. That's really interesting. I mean, yeah, I think there's I want to say two sort of main camps of people that I found. Is that you get the people who live here and then will go elsewhere because they don't necessarily want to be just grounded in a single location. I think a lot of work, a lot of what happens in the Southwest is very much based in the Southwest because of a somewhat of a divide between that and the rest of the country. And I feel like if you move to a place like London, a lot of that is a bit wider out.
It's a great point.
Is that a sound you get a lot in London?
The sirens.
Yeah.
All the time. It's because I live on a like an artery road that goes from Old Street, Shoreditch, directly into North London. And so to get to any of the major hospitals along that route, you have to go along this road. And I think because of the virus, but also generally anyway, it's loud. But yeah. You're right. And talking of roads and travel, that's the reason. Like, without a shadow of a doubt, poor transport links to the Southwest are the primary driver behind people getting out. Because let's say I live in Essex, right? For example, obviously it's close to London, and by being close to London, you get the transport links to the north and the south. Let's say I live in anywhere along that northern trunk line. You can get pretty much anywhere within that kind of northern, anywhere north of, London, you can get there within 3-4 hours. For the Southwest, it takes you 4.5 hours to get from, if I'm going from Brixham to London, it would take me 5 hours probably, or probably more, and that's not, I don't know how we have got to a point in this country where trains and transport systems are as bad as they are, and perhaps I have to be a bit careful because I work in engineering communities, but and it's not the engineers' faults, but how it's as expensive and thin cover across the country is, I don't get it. I don't get why we aren't investing more heavily in transport, specifically to the Southwest. And there is investment, but there's nowhere near enough for it to make a difference. Certainly not in my, early working lifetime, and probably not, probably not even for my kids, because if you look at some of these rail projects are taking 20-30 years to complete.
Yeah, it's crazy. If only they could be here now.
Yeah, and that's why things like HS2, and Crossrail and Crossrail 2 are so important, because sometimes it's not even about the level of investment, the money. Sometimes it's about what you're spending it on, and things like HS2, massive opposition up and down the country, rightfully so in some regards because of its ecological impact and its impact on local residents. But actually, we look at the bigger picture, that rail line hasn't been properly upgraded in 50, 60 years, probably more than that. And it's going to unlock growth opportunities for people like me and you who live in areas of the country which you cannot get to easily from a city, not just London, but in the middle of nowhere, in the north. You can't get to a major city without driving, basically, or changing 8 different trains. Those are the things that need to change in order for places like Torbay to stop losing people to major cities, because you unlock that access. If I had to travel, I'm not saying Torbay to London is ever going to be like an hour, but let's say I had to travel 2 hours to get to a very, a decent paying job with decent progression and opportunity, I'd happily do that a day. There are people that do that to London, 2 hours, from Milton Keynes or whatever. People would do it, but you can't, because the structure isn't there to do it. So long answer to your straightforward question.
I mean, it takes me 2 hours to get from Falmouth to Paignton.
insane.
Yeah. Which is, I think, less than 100 miles. It is.
Yeah.
The interesting thing I find with that is that if you take, I mean, we're getting on to transport now, it's crazy, but if you go through the Tamar and go through Plymouth, it is about 97 miles, something like that. If you go over the A30, so you go over Dartmoor to Exeter and then back from Exeter to Paignton, that is about 120 miles, so an extra 20 miles, and it's only 2 minutes longer to do that than it is to go through Plymouth, which kind of doesn't bode well for the roads in that sort of area.
No, you know, we're never going to solve that problem. You and I sitting here talking about it, but it's indicative of why people leave, you know, and why people get out of places like that. And, you know, obviously this is a Southwest heavy conversation, but the same is true all over the country, pockets all over the country, mainly coastal regions, coastal towns and cities, where there are young people literally like climbing the walls to get out into a city environment because they want to, whatever it is, progress, earn more money, do something that you can't do where you are, whatever the reason. You have to find a way to help those people stay in the place that they grew up and do that job. Maybe the virus and the whole working from home thing has changed that. And maybe, you know, when I said earlier that people are making big life decisions and deciding they can now work from home, if that's something that sticks and companies begin to offer much more flexible working opportunities when things are back to normal, then that is a way that could happen. You know, in theory, you could only go into the office 1 day a week. You know, if I could live in Torbay, let's pretend I'm not me and I don't love London, because I do, but let's pretend I don't. You know, if I could live in Torbay and still do my job by going into the office 1 day a week, like, that's all right. You know, I'm by the sea. I'm probably not being paid quite as much money, but my transport into London will be covered. Okay. You know, sounds like a good life. Kids get to grow up by the sea, you know, family around you. I love London a lot, so I probably wouldn't go back home just yet because I'm enjoying living in the city where I was pre-pandemic. But I'm sure there are loads of people that take up that offer. So it will be fascinating to see what the next kind of year, 2 years and longer you know, the changes that happen to our daily work lives. But to the title of this series, Creative Chats, I hope that creatively, for my creative self, I hope that we get back to an environment and a system by which we are majority in the office, because I think that's really key to how we work.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it's been a really, really good chat so far. So thank you for, again, you do talk a lot, but so far it's been really, really good. So.
Yes, I do. Okay, you know, you're welcome. More than welcome.
Yeah. One thing, because of course we've had we've had 1 or 2 people on the show before who are marketers, event people, studying that kind of thing. And there are probably people who are watching this who are, as I said, studying now. Do you have any advice for those people? So the people who want to get into events, maybe corporate events or other events, and what's your advice to them?
It's good, another good question. I think I actually got asked this question earlier today. I was on a COVID-19 event awareness, COVID-19 awareness training session for event managers, or for event students actually, at the university, and I was able to get involved. And then I got asked at the end of that exact question, and the answer I gave is the answer I think I give like a broken record whenever anyone asks this question. You have to be in it to win it, right? And I don't think I've ever said that phrase actually, but you do have to be in it to win it. You have to say yes to everything that comes your way and worry about the how and the why later. And the reason I say that is because events as an industry, right? The event industry is quite new, actually, officially. You know, it's only really been recognized as an industry for maybe 20 years, 25 years, something like that. Event management courses and degrees only came around maximum 5 years ago. I know because I was on the first one in the UK, the first cohort in the UK at my university. And so as a result, there are the event industry professionals for example, it always used to be a job, if you work in a corporate organization that doesn't run events, but just like a corporate business, their internal events usually were run by one of the secretaries or an admin person or a salesperson who just runs the event as well as doing their job, right? Now there are event specific roles for those kinds of positions. And I think as the event industry becomes more legitimate and people think, oh, hang on a minute, I'm attending a festival or a concert. Who is it that organizes this? That is a job. That job exists. Somebody is doing that. And that's a concept I don't think people would come to terms with. As that becomes more and more true, the level of opportunity offered to people in events is going to grow, right? So chances for professional development and volunteering opportunities and all of that kind of stuff is growing at such a rate that all you got to do is say yes. All you've got to do is reach out and grab it, connect with as many people as possible, get involved in as much as possible, and say yes to everything. When I was at university, I got offered loads of opportunities to work on all sorts of random stuff, half marathons, and there's a thing called the International Live Music Conference, which is production people in live music. So concert producers, tour producers, that kind of stuff. They all meet together to have a conference once a year. And so every industry in the world has a conference. The conference of dog walkers, I'm sure, exists, and things like that. And so all of that opportunity, you get offered stuff that you think, well, I'm never going to work in live music, or I'm never going to work in dog walking. I'm never going to. Just say yes. Take that opportunity. If you're particularly if you're studying to do those things, go and stand out in the cold at a half marathon waving a flag for 4 hours. I've done it. Did I enjoy it? Not really. But did it lead to something? Yes. I was out there doing my thing, cheering everybody on, and doing the monotonous post-manning job that I was asked to do. And the following year, I was paid then at the same event to organise all the live music, because we got talking. They understood that I had a background in booking acts for the festival. So from doing one tiny little thing that you might think is really easy to say no to, this kind of world unravels in front of you. And once you show yourself to be interested, people are desperate in this industry to share their knowledge and just share their experience, particularly the older people in our industry who, perhaps don't have successors lined up, and they want to share their knowledge and their experience. All you've got to do is say yes, and a whole world of chaos, opens in front of you, and you'll have a lot of fun.
That's great. That's really, really good advice.
I try.
I think the episode is drawing to a close now, but thank you so much, Harry, for coming on. Any big projects coming up, or is that all sort of top secret with your...
At work, big projects. Yeah, I mean, this year's a big year for us, because we go from fully virtual to half virtual, hybrid, kind of, trying to get back on track to physical. So it's big year to try and, all heavily dependent on the vaccine rollout and government policy. But let's see where we get to. And then personally, I've had a pretty busy couple of years, so I'm kind of enjoying settling down a little bit and not taking on too much. So, last year I let go of Brixfest fully, walked away, stepped away from it. I've got a few little side gigs, but broadly speaking, I just want to kind of just relax a little bit, take a bit of the pace off. So yeah, no big projects really planned, just hoping that we get back to some level of normality, and then take it from there.
Awesome, cool. Well, you've been really, really great to have on, so thank you, Harry.
No problem. Thank you for having me, it's been a pleasure.
No problem. Yeah, if people want to follow your endeavors or anything like that, is there any place that they can find that, whether that's your company or a personal social media or anything like that?
Sure, yeah. I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay.
So anyone can connect with me on there. I'm on Twitter, Harry_BOWER, I think. And I'm on Instagram, just Harry BOWER. Very basic, very boring. And Yeah, I post a lot of memes to my story. I don't post many grid photographs. I think the last one I posted was this summer, but lots of story action.
That's good. That's great. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for coming on, Harry. Thank you to everyone who's watched this all the way through. And yeah, I hope that you, Harry, and everyone watching has a happy 2021. All right. All right.
Me too. Sorry, was I supposed to jump in there? Me too. Have a happy 2021. Cheers, guys.
Brilliant. Okay. All right. See you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.